Marcus Junius Brutus is probably the most famous assassin in history, and he killed only one man outside the battlefield, Julius Caesar. And it's not really an assassination, more like a successful conspiracy. In the end, Caesar's corpse rewarded him for his betrayal with negative historical popularity. But has no one thought that Brutus could have his own motives, which have nothing to do with personal enrichment? By the way, in addition to killing Caesar, Brutus had other merits. Let's try to understand what kind of man was Marcus Junius Brutus. It is not known exactly when Brutus was born. Sources give different data. In addition, opinions about his biological father are also contradictory. According to the most widespread version, Brutus was the only child of the people's tribune Marcus Junius Brutus. It so happened that our hero was orphaned early, as his father during the Civil War chose the wrong side and was killed by order of Gnaeus Pompey. This moment I advise you to remember, it will be useful in the future. The mother of Marcus Junius Brutus was Servilia, a representative of the oldest aristocratic family, Servilia Scipianov. In the family of Brutus' mother, almost every generation gave Rome a consul, and this very honorable. One can imagine what hopes his mother had for her son. So from a young age, Brutus was taught by the best teachers of philosophy, mathematics, rhetoric, and many other sciences useful for the future politician. Servilia's brother Marcus Porcius Cato the Younger takes the boy under his wing from an early age, instructing him on the path of a true republican. He teaches him philosophy, leads him to the political field. In addition, Brutus' mother had impressive connections in the Senate, so the young man is already perceived as a future wearer of the senatorial tunic. For the first time, Brutus is mentioned in the political life of Rome in the 59th year before Christ, during the consulship of Gaius Julius Caesar and Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus. Moreover, the first mention of Brutus was in a negative way, because testifying for the existence of a conspiracy against Caesar, a Roman citizen, Lucius Vedius, mentioned Marcus Junius Brutus as a member of the conspirators. The consul did not react to the testimony of Vedius, but by happy coincidence, after a short meeting with Caesar, Vedius changed his testimony, completely forgetting about Brutus, and soon mysteriously died in prison. And now, the most interesting thing, many witnesses to the process identified the strange death of Vedius with the participation of Caesar. Even the lazy did not talk about it, and Cicero, being in warm friendship with Brutus, shouted about it almost at every corner. The question arises, and what does Caesar have to do with it? It's all about the special relationship between Gaius Julius and Servilia. They were lovers. In Rome, it was also rumored that Brutus is the illegitimate son of the consul. It is, of course, a dubious claim, but Caesar's high patronage of Brutus in this moment and in all subsequent ones really makes you wonder. Soon Marcus Junius Brutus becomes a monetarius, a responsible position in charge of coinage. His first order of business was to mint denarii bearing the image of two of his ancestors, Lucius Junius Brutus and Gaius Servilius Agula. It just so happens that these two men fought against tyranny and were considered the lights of democratic freedom for posterity. Lucius Junius Brutus overthrew his tyrant uncle altogether and became one of the founders of the Roman Republic. So, in the Marcus Junius family, it was considered a good deed to sacrifice one's own interests for the sake of freedom. The further actions of Brutus in the political field of the Roman Republic had nothing remarkable. Intrigue and intrigue again. The life of Marcus Junius became truly interesting only with the outbreak of civil war. After Caesar crossed the Rubicon River, Brutus was faced with the choice of which side to take. He stays true to his ideals and takes the side of Gnaeus Pompey, declining Caesar's invitation. How strong must Brutus' convictions be to finally align himself with the murderer of his own father and turn against the benefactor who helped to elevate him? Yes, one can find thousands of other reasons why Brutus did so and not otherwise. We should not ignore the influence of Cato's uncle, but all his further actions will speak only of his desire to preserve the republican system in Rome. Brutus participates in the Battle of Pharsalus, where Pompey with a cracking loss to the future dictator. Mark Junius manages to leave the battlefield and hide in the swamps. Then he goes to Larissa, from where he wrote a letter to Caesar with a request to accept him. Gaius Julius was overjoyed by the letter from the son of a former lover, and with great honors received Brutus, calling him his friend. If Plutarch is to be believed, as an initiation to enter Caesar's inner circle, Brutus told him that Pompey should be sought in Egypt. Subsequently, Marcus Junius helps his patron fight his opponents in Cilicia, Pontus, Galatia, and Bithynia. Taking advantage of the dictator's favor, Brutus saves from execution his friend Gaius Cassius Longinus, a former supporter of Pompey. Caesar did not skimp on good positions for the young talent and contributed to the absentee election of Brutus Augur, and later governor of Cisalpine Gaul. In his new position, he showed himself to be an effective administrator, which earned the gratitude of citizens who spared no money to erect a memorial monument to Brutus. In the spring of 45 years, Mark returned to Rome, where caring Caesar prepared him the post of city praetor. Despite the lack of free time accompanying such a responsible appointment, Brutus enters into a touching correspondence with Marcus Tullius Cicero, a very respected man, a supporter of the republican form of government. Together they discuss dictatorship, occasionally berating Caesar, and exchange literary works. Since there is a lot of information on the subject of Caesar's assassination, we will not talk about the reasons for the conspiracy, but only consider the figure of Brutus in the whole affair. When Caesar returned from the African campaign in Rome, there was already an unhealthy atmosphere. Senators little by little sowed confusion, discussing in countless debates the state of political institutions under the dictator. Former supporters of Caesar, dissatisfied with their positions, also added fuel to the fire. In the young Brutus, many saw the leader of a possible conspiracy because of his origin and proximity to the dictator, but Mark himself did not show much desire to get involved with the conspirators. Not without Cicero, this man with his sweet speeches tried to induce Brutus to the ideas of forced restoration of republican order, feeling that the young man is inclined to democracy. Thus, the esteemed Cicero dedicates a whole treatise to Marcus, where he opaquely hints to Brutus that it would be good to get rid of the dictator. One can guess what doubts were raging inside Brutus before he agreed to conspire against his benefactor. The fact is that Marcus had long believed that once Caesar solved all the internal problems of Rome, he would definitely restore the Republic, but as we know, absolute power drags on. Brutus most likely made the decision to join the conspirators' club after Caesar was proclaimed dictator for life. This generally coincided with Brutus' goals. Caesar would restore the Republic as soon as he died. Prior to the arrival of Marcus, the conspiracy was led by his friend, Gaius Cassius Longinus. In the ranks of the conspirators numbered, according to various sources, up to 60 senators. Discussed many plans, so some senators proposed together with Caesar to stab and Mark Antony, who was the most ardent supporter of the dictator. Brutus, who led the conspiracy, rejected any vain sacrifice, believing that as soon as Caesar will be defeated, immediately in the sky will appear in the rainbow, and in Rome will triumph in freedom. When the assassination was accomplished, Brutus, standing over the bloody body of the dictator, tried to make a speech so that other senators who did not belong to the conspiracy understood the motives of his team and amicably supported what had happened. But it so happened that after Caesar's death, the senators were frightened and fled in panic. Nevertheless, Brutus and other conspirators organized to leave the scene and headed for the capital, on the way chanting that democracy is inevitable and the dictator is defeated, while demonstrating bloody swords. For the first weeks after Caesar's liquidation, Brutus and his supporters were in Rome trying to establish republican political institutions. At first, his actions were met with mixed reactions, as many senators represented only a silent majority, waiting for further developments to see which position was best to adopt. After the announcement of Caesar's generous bequest, the plebs demanded the heads of the conspirators, and Brutus and his comrades had to leave Rome. As history shows, in whose hands the capital, the one in charge. The forces of Caesar's supporters grew. Brutus was declared an enemy of the people, as well as all the conspirators, putting their names on the lists of proscriptions. Marcus finds himself in a precarious situation. He headed for Athens as he had a lot of support in Greece. There he began to prepare for the final battle for the Republic. By this time, Brutus didn't care about the Senate. His soul was dominated by the conviction that only he could bring Rome back to the ideals of democracy. Having secured the support of Greek allies, Brutus together with Gaius Cassius Longinus gather a large army, along with subjugating the kings in the east, in order to secure the borders in advance from invasion from outside. Meanwhile, in Rome, the Second Triumvirate is formed to fight the rebellious Republicans, with Octavian Augustus at its head. The troops of the Second Triumvirate landed in the Balkans. Due to the indecisiveness of the Republic fleet, the crossing went off without incident. The commanders of the Republican legions were cowardly, allowing the army of Octavian and Mark Antony to enter the strategic space. The main Republican forces were already on their way to the Caesarian positions to give a decisive battle. The two armies met near the city of Philippi. Brutus camped opposite Octavian's camp, and Cassius opposite Mark Antony. Such a confrontation involuntarily called for symbolism, where Brutus and Octavian, two politicians competing in dexterity and sophistication, and Antony and Cassius, two experienced generals, honoring bravery and courage. The battle began. Brutus' army successfully conducted a maneuver and surrounded Octavian's soldiers, breaking into his camp. Triumvir managed to escape, but his army was decently thinned. Meanwhile, the flank under Cassius' command was crushed under the pressure of Antony's legions. Brutus sends cavalrymen to help his comrade, and they arrive at the right moment to the camp of Cassius. But in the resulting confusion, Longinus thought it was the enemy cavalry and killed himself. The battlefield was left for Brutus, but the death of his friend was an irreparable loss not only in personal terms, but also in strategic terms, because Cassius was considered the most experienced commander of the entire pool of Republicans. The next battle took place 20 days later. Brutus commanded the army alone, and the dead officers of Cassius replaced by young aristocrats. The logical outcome was defeat. Realizing that the campaign was lost, Brutus committed suicide. As a result, Marcus Junius Brutus, no doubt a talented politician, a good manager, one of the most educated Romans of his time, fell victim to his own ideals. Although his actions were repeatedly considered and weighed, but he took the path where he simply had no choice. The burden of a legacy of exploits in the name of freedom now and then peeked at him from the shadows of the past. Brutus' entourage was similarly not conducive to a quiet development under the established dictatorship. The two men who had the greatest influence on the last Republican of the Triumvirate era, Cato and Cicero, nurtured in him the seeds of doubt in Caesar, actively encouraging attacks against the hand that feeds him. Brutus was an idealist, but he was hardly a radical. He was inclined to radicalism by his entourage, who saw him as a good leader, but if during the execution of the conspiracy, his hand did not tremble, Brutus was definitely not at ease inside. Most likely, Mark convinced himself that he was not fighting Caesar at all, but against the system he had created. I am more inclined to believe that Marcus Junius Brutus is a victim of history rather than its antagonist, because he had more to lose from Caesar's assassination than all the conspirators put together, and it was he who continued the battle for the fated Roman Republic until his last breath.